Scheduled meeting to do a special debate meeting today. The topic for today is, in Oregon, should the voting age be changed from 18 to 16 years old? And we have up here 4 debaters who have volunteered to debate this. Here's how today's debate is going to go. In a second, I'm going to ask you all to vote on this, and then we're going to pass it to Jill. And then we're going to spend some time for them to share opening arguments. We're going to open it up to Q&A, where I'm going to be leading that. And then we're also going to spend some time for Q&A, where you, the audience, can ask clarifying questions to the debaters. During the Q&A with the audience, it is not a time for you to share your opinion with the debaters. It is not a time for you to attack the debaters or make a point to the debaters. It is a time to ask questions to the debaters. You can ask a question that is open to everyone, or you can ask a question to a particular debater based on what they said. So it's also important that you, as the audience, are listening, are engaging, and writing down and ready for your question, because that's also a vital part of the debate, is making sure that we have good engagement during that Q&A period. I also just want to thank everyone for being open to this topic. I know it interrupts the usual flow. Not everyone gets an opportunity to speak. With that being said, I hope that you share it and take the opportunity to speak during the Q&A session and engage in that dialogue.
No.
All right, with that being said, if you could, on your ballots that you have in front of you where it says best table topics in that line, that's where you can vote. And you can either vote for the motion on there, say for, you can say against if you're against the motion, or you can say undecided if you are unsure at this time. And once you are done voting, please pass those over to Jill, who is our vote counter. We are now going to transition to our speakers. We have 2 teams here. We have the team to my left, which will be arguing for the motion that the voting age should be changed in Oregon from 18 to 16. And then we have the team arguing to my right here that against the motion that the voting age should not be changed from 18 to 16 in the state of Oregon. Going first will be the team arguing for the motion. And I have a nice little introduction to give from Rudy on that. Rudy will be our first speaker. He has been a Gresham Toastmaster since 2012. In his previous life, based on his inspired events from political debates he experienced in childhood, where he studied political science and modern history in Munich, Germany. Today, he believes that politics is too serious a matter to be left to politicians. Therefore, he is happy to have this debate and this opportunity to share his ideas and belief about voting rights and hear the arguments from the opposing side. So, with that being said, please help me welcome Rudy. He will be speaking for 4 to 6 minutes.
Thank you. No problem. Good morning, everyone. Voting rights. The right that we, the people, elect representatives or officials to govern ourselves, and the ability to change it every 4 years, is probably one of the quintessential gifts the United States of America has given to the rest of the world. Until then, a king, emperor, duke, or a group of people decided for you where you could live, how much you owed them, and they could ask you any time for your taxes, or sometimes even what religion you could believe in. However, from the beginning, all men are created equal, and one man, one vote came with restrictions and strings attached. At first, the beginning of our nation, property ownership was a key category that allowed you to vote. And interestingly enough, the state of New Jersey in its constitution allowed unmarried women to vote as long as they fulfilled the requirement of owning property. However, very soon, that property requirement was dropped, and the main criteria became white adult men. They were the only ones to vote in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
The Civil War, however, then brought slavery and that question to the forefront, and the nation realized that non-white men were also deeply affected by the laws of our government. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to all male adults. 50 years later, in 1920, the nation realized that women are also deeply affected by the laws of our government, and the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. Fast forward another 50 years, in 1971, during the Vietnam War, the draft was established, and 18, 19, and 20-year-olds were asked to serve for their country and sometimes pay the ultimate sacrifice. The voting age was 21, but people believed that the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds should also have a say in the laws that were requiring them to go to war. So in 1971, the 26th Amendment was passed that lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. It was the fastest ratified amendment in United States history. However, to this day, 17 states have not ratified that amendment. Today, another 50 years later, people in Oregon are asked to lower the voting age even further. And the argument is still the same. 16 and 17 years old are deeply affected by the laws that are created by us, people 18 and over. I believe that young people have adult responsibilities, just like we. They don't have all the same responsibilities because we want them to go to school, but some of them do work. 16 and 17 years old pay taxes. It's estimated this year it will be between $850 and $900 million. However, their taxation has no representation. They have no say what will happen with that money. The question is also, should we value our young people only by their monetary contribution? Young people volunteer. My daughter is here today. We went plenty of times to the Oregon Food Bank. Does that have value to our society? I believe it does. She also visits regularly her grandma, who has sadly Alzheimer's, lives in a senior center. Is that value? There is no monetary benefit to any of us. I believe it is a huge value. We also ask 16 and 17 years old to follow our laws. Every state has the possibility that 16 and 17 years old are tried in court like adults. What we are saying is that they are old enough and smart enough to understand the laws that we created, that they understand what is right and wrong, yet when it comes to creating those laws and shaping those laws, we are telling them they are not mature enough. There are also many, many issues underrepresented in our elections. Environmental issues are a prime example. We create laws that pollute our air, pollute our water, yet in the last presidential debate in 2016, we had 4 debates, 3 presidential, 1 vice presidential, 360 minutes. How many minutes do you think we talked about environmental issues? 5 minutes and 37 seconds. 1 question was asked, and that was the improvement over 2012, where the number was 0. I think the lives of our young are deeply affected by those decisions, and they should have a say in it, just like 18-year-olds, just like women, just like non-white male adults. The Voting Rights Act for 1965 states, any person who has not been adjudged an incompetent and who has completed the 6th grade in a public school or in a private school accredited by any state or territory, the District of Columbia, or the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, possesses sufficient literacy, comprehension, and intelligence.
We will now hear opening statements from the opposing team. for the motion. Karen will be speaking first. Karen wanted me to let you all know that she has been in Toastmasters for a number of years. Too many, I think, even for her to remember. She has a wide array of experience, ranging from sales to business development to leadership. She considers herself a master of persuasion. Is that right, Karen? Absolutely. All right. With that being said, please help me welcome Karen.
Rudy, that was fabulous. Thank you. The history all brought together in a matter of minutes. Let me tell you about me when I was 16 years old. Yeah, I was a pretty good kid. I didn't fight with my parents. I wasn't very rebellious. Actually, I really wasn't rebellious. I'm still waiting for those rebellious days. You know what was important to me when I was 16? Hanging with my friends. That's what I cared about. Doing pretty good in school. I was a B+ student. B. Playing sports. And you know what else? Drinking. Was that a wise choice? Was that a mature choice on Friday nights after the football games to go and drink more than one probably should? One absolutely should not be drinking when you're 16 years old or 17 years old. I was an older school person, so I was still a sophomore when I turned 16. Our hangout place was the tower, the water tower up on Rose Parkway. And groups of us would hang there. We didn't drive. We were smart enough not to drive. But we were influenced by each other. We were influenced by our peer group. We weren't making our own choices. We also happened to be very influenced in other ways by our parents. I remember sitting down with my father, and my father, who was a staunch Republican, taught me the ways of government and why. He set it up so I had a choice. Should I be a Democrat or should I be a Republican? Did I really have a choice the way my father skewed the argument? No, I didn't. I was influenced by my father on how to vote. When I was 16 years old, as I recall, our civics class was in 6th grade, where we learned about the difference of government, the 3 branches, what it all means. There wasn't a whole lot else in my high school days about the value of government, about what government was doing. There isn't today still an education system set up in our schools that is mandatory for our children to learn about government. There's pieces of it, yes. But is it a deep learning or even a broad learning of the value and what government is for? There's not. The other thing that was going on when I was 16 and being influenced by my friends is learning, and I'm ashamed to say none of you are police, right? Was learning how to steal. 16 years old, I had to go steal a necklace. I did it. I feel guilty, still. It was a really cute necklace, it was a little heart. I don't know quite where, I don't even know where it's at anymore. Could have gone to jail. Could have gotten in a whole lot of trouble for that, you're right. But I was influenced by the people around me to make that decision. And it was a decision. 16, he had a rough time. He had a rough time. He was not mature enough to vote. He encountered the law too, because he made bad decisions because he was a young boy without a fully developed brain, just like I was a young girl without a fully developed brain. I don't believe 16-year-olds deserve the pressure of what voting is. I don't think 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds are prepared and understand the big picture of voting. Fellow Toastmasters.
Our next speaker arguing for the motion is going to be Holly Fasoni. She is a graduate of the University of Southern Mississippi, where she studied business administration and management. She moved to Oregon in 2014, where she currently works for the Gresham Area Chamber of Commerce as CEO in training. Before being presented with this debate, she didn't have a strong opinion either way, but after a bit of research, her choice became clear. I'm so excited that she stepped up to do this debate after being a member for, I think, less than a month, which is like awesome. With that being said, please help me welcome Holly.
Wow, thanks everyone. I would just like to piggyback off of what Karen was saying, and that yes, some 16-year-olds are irresponsible and drink too much and they're heavily influenced, but I am living proof that some 16-year-olds are forced to grow up earlier, and so I'd like to fight for those people. So I would like to start off with some positive points. How can we as a country, as a state, as a small community, how can we thrive from this? What benefit does it bring to us? Young people make good voters. When the voting age has been lowered to 16, young people show more interest in voting. When Tacoma Park, Maryland lowered the voting age to 16 and 17-year-olds had a turnout rate 4 times higher than individuals 18 and older. 17-year-olds alone had a higher turnout rate than people aged 20 to 50 in the Chicago primary in 2014. That's huge, you guys. 17-year-olds alone, 20 to 50? 20 to 50-year-olds should know what's going on. They should be engaged. They should be lining up at the polls. Similar trends also occur outside of the US. Are they good votes? Well, according to a study in Austria, where the minimum voting age is 16, voters 16 to 17 were found to have made choices that were more congruent with their party's decisions, meaning it did not have a negative impact on the legitimacy and the quality of the democratic decisions. Knowledge and experience are often what I hear for the opposing team. They're not knowledgeable on the issues. They don't have any life experience. Well, neither of those are criteria for voting eligibility. Now, I agree that voting is a sacred civic act that should not be taken lightly. However, the use of knowledge or literacy tests are banned in the US due to their discriminatory nature. In 1975, the Senate Judiciary Committee stated, "It's difficult to see why citizens who cannot read or write should be prevented from participating in decisions that directly affect their environment." And I think this is piggybacking off of what Rudy said earlier. So, with that said, should people with brain injuries or people with maturity issues or developmental delays, should they lose their right to vote? Another thing is, young people are already participating in politics. From running for state legislature to mayor, to forming political action committees, to becoming grassroots activists. people have really proven their passion. And it's their enthusiasm to practice their rights to vote that encourages me so much. By allowing this process, I believe that we are watering the right seeds. You know, we're showing them the way, if you will. And hundreds of teens in Oregon spent their spring breaks pleading with the lawmakers down in Salem to get us to where we are right now. Lowering the voting age will also increase voter turnout. People who vote in one election are more likely to vote in the next election. When I moved to college, I was in an unfamiliar city, I didn't know anybody, and this made my first voting experience a challenge. I had just turned 18 and, you know, I'm in this new place, where do I even go? I felt like I had no support. And not only would lowering the voting age set young people up for success, but it would also encourage meaningful discussions within the household. And isn't it healthy to be able to debate topics such as this? Whether agreeing or disagreeing with the political opinions of their sons and daughters, voter turnout of parents increased according to a study of the Kids Voting Program. Toastmasters.
We will hear opening remarks from the team arguing against the motion. Mary, like Karen, has been in Toastmasters for a number of years, has served a variety of roles, including president at one point. She is a strong leader. She leads by example, is often more soft-spoken, but has very strong opinions and is not afraid to share them when she has strong convictions like she does today. With that being said, please come
Good morning, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Well, you've heard a lot, pros and cons. And there are a lot of articles out there about 16-year-olds voting, and it is hot in the press, I'll tell you that. But do 16-year-olds really understand the consequences of what they're voting for? According to the American Psychology Association, a 16-year-old's frontal cortex is still developing. Why would I even bring that up, or why is that important? The frontal cortex is a section that controls reasoning, and it makes us think before we act. If the frontal cortex is not fully developed, it could easily lead to a 16-year-old being influenced or even coerced into voting a certain way by adults. That's really important about lowering that voting age to 16. Rudy had brought this point up about the voting age being lowered during the Vietnam War in 1971 and the 26th Amendment to the Constitution. Those young men were giving their lives for our country. It was it was logical to lower the from 21 to 18. So for them to be able to stand up and go and fight for our country, they should be able to elect their leaders that are actually sending them to war. That made sense to lower the voting age. Although the drinking age right now is 21, but the law for the drinking age, it continues to move towards greater maturity, but more responsibility and not less. So when you think about teenagers driving at 16 years old, there's some restrictions that they have. It's not all, oh, go have fun with everybody and you can, do like what Karen and I did growing up at 16-year-old, and you have your license. And I can remember one time I was drinking and driving, and I was the driver. And we stopped at this little short stop 7-Eleven type place, very close to the house. Thank goodness it was way back in the day, because if that happened now, turn on my headlights, I didn't want to be seen. Now, how logical is that with 16 and 17-year-old people? That's what was going on in my mind when I was that age as well. He stopped us right past our house. We went down this major boulevard, took a left onto our street, and he pulled us over, and I just kept driving by our houses, and he goes, and I would roll down the window probably about this much, and I go, "Hi, officer," and he, you know, asked for your license and everything, and he knew what we were up to. But he said, "I scared you right past your house, didn't I?" I said, "Yes, officer." "You did. I'll tell ya." He goes, you go home and be safe, and I don't want to see you again."
All right,
That was it for me. I didn't drink and drive ever again. If that was today, though, and I know there's 16, 17-year-olds that are out there still partying and having a good time. I have nieces, and I see what they've done as well. So really, having 16-year-olds to vote, I agree that there are some 16-year-olds that could make a very good choice in voting, but that is a small percentage. There is a lot of pressure out there on 16-year-olds. They have to try to fit in with their peers. They're trying to make an impression. They're trying to they're becoming themselves and becoming who they are. And to add that additional pressure to them about who they're going to vote for at that time of their life, that is too much pressure. And we see that in teenage suicides and how they continue to increase. The last thing that we should do as adults is add that pressure to our 16-year-olds and having them vote for our representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for those opening remarks. We're now going to transition to a session for the debaters to, in a way, engage based on their opening remarks and talk amongst themselves, and I'll be sort of facilitating that portion and before we open up to Q&A with the audience. The main arguments that I sort of heard from the team arguing for the motion, they brought up the point that 16 and 17-year-olds can be tried as adults in many cases, yet they don't have the right to vote. They mentioned the Tacoma Park, Maryland, where there's a place where 16 and 17-year-olds are able to vote, and it has actually increased voter turnouts where 16 and 17-year-olds vote at a higher rate than 18-year-olds. They also brought up that it increases voter turnout, sort of this trickle-up theory, whereby 16 and 17-year-olds voting, it actually increases turnouts with their parents and adults voting as well. They mentioned that it improves the lives of youth by bringing them into the fold, and they also just brought up the role that they should have a say in our future, given the fact that they are the ones who are going to be leading the way and making the decisions. They should have a say at this period of time. Some of the main arguments we heard against the motion, they brought up the lack of experience that 16 and 17-year-olds had. In many cases, they aren't working. They're still living under their parents' roof. There's a lot of decision making that they don't have control over yet. There's a sort of lack of overall experience in terms of whether they should be able to vote. They also brought up the brain development of 16 years old, how it's not fully developed in their frontal cortex. In the frontal cortex, therefore their decision-making process is different, limiting their ability to vote, as well as the pressures of voting at such a young age given everything else that they have going on in their lives. I would actually like to start with something that Mary said, bringing up the psychological aspect. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think it's important. It's an important thing to consider. I was wondering, when looking at the frontal cortex, you mentioned how at 16 years old it's not fully developed. At what age does it fully develop, and are 18-year-olds at an age where it is fully developed? If you could share a little bit more about that.
Robert, to answer your question, I believe it is, well, we're discussing it between ourselves. I think it's 24, Karen thinks it's 25, but it is older than 18.
But it continues to develop year after year as you continue to exercise decision-making.
And I believe up in, the brain continues until age 40 and then starts to decline.
Yeah, during this portion of time, feel free to just chime in. You don't have to ask. It's for you to just sort of converse, and I'll interject when needed.
Sounds good. I want to share that. I have the same research that the frontal cortex does not develop till 25. And scientists believe it's sometimes between 23 and 27 that it fully develops. And the question is then, how is it justified that 21-year-olds are considered mature enough when the brain is still not fully developed? And what are we thinking or doing with the elderly when the brain declines? We have diseases like dementia, not just Alzheimer's, where the brain and the cognitive ability declines. Are you suggesting we need to have tests on people to have a cognitive ability that we determine that then allows us to vote or not? That is my question for you.
No.
And then your argument is 21 is an arbitrary decision, so is 16, I do agree. My argument is then the life of the 16-year-olds, what Mary mentioned earlier, is not just affected by 18-year-olds, but the livelihood of 16 years old is affected just the same way. I want to bring up school shootings, a very sad topic, but in the line of fires are our students in our high schools. There are plenty of solutions being proposed, arming our teachers, even though police says it's not a good idea. If you send a SWAT team into the school, anybody armed with a gun is considered the possible shooter. We are asking our students to go to school every day. I can't tell you how many times my daughter in the last 3 years said that she's not safe at school. Yet, we are saying we don't want to listen to what they say should the solution be, and we don't allow them to influence the debate. And I think that's wrong. 16-year-old, yes, it's arbitrary. It's as arbitrary as 18 and 21, but 16-year-olds, life is at stake, and they should have a say, just like women before them, just like non-white men before them, just like 18-year-olds before them.
16-year-olds have yet to, most 16-year-olds have yet to have to make decisions on their own. 16-year-olds are required by law to be in school. It's not a choice to go to school, unfortunately, or fortunately. We need to educate. We want to raise children into healthy, strong decision-making human beings that help the planet, that help society.
Yes, ma'am.
If you've read, I've been reading a little bit about the school shootings and the people, the children who are now grown up in Columbine, from Columbine, some of their initials, early shootings. Their debate is just as strong whether or not people should have guns in school or no guns in school. The debate continues. I'm guessing with age and with time, they've changed their mind on how that should happen because they've grown up, because they've seen the world, because they've had to contribute to the world. 16-year-old, I worked every single weekend. I didn't pay many dollars in taxes because you know what, that annual income, even working every weekend and being really one of the people in my school who had the most money, I didn't pay very many dollars in taxes because my annual income did not meet that threshold.
I actually want to bring up an interesting point since you are on the topic of schools. One of the things that should be mentioned in regards to Tacoma Park is their voting there is done at a local level. So 16 and 17-year-olds aren't voting on national issues because that has to be a federal law. So all voting is done in local elections, school boards, things of that nature. I think one of the things that they're proponents of is saying that 16 and 17-year-olds should have a say in at least local elections, which is what we're talking about here, having the right to vote in Oregon about that. So what is your take on that? Should 16 and 17-year-olds have a right to vote on what's going on in their schools?
It just in their schools.
Yeah, on
So
local
like
election, talking about that.
That's more. still don't believe that they should at this point. Because of all the pressures that they're currently facing in today's world. That's just adding another level of pressure to teenagers that they do not need. I believe that the 16-year-olds can easily influence their parents. If they're that strongly and passionate about it, they have those debates at home, and they can influence their parents and their teachers and whoever else they come in contact with in their communities by volunteering and change their minds on how the vote should be. Because of the way that the current elections have proceeded and the turnout and the laws that have passed, not everybody feels the way that the election goes. Therefore, by stating that 16-year-olds are gonna change all of that, I just don't believe that is the case. They're not gonna change the way the voting is. We still have the rest of the American public that votes, and we still are able to, we're getting our voices out there and heard, but that is a democratic process. Sometimes the decision and the way that you feel passes, and sometimes it does not, regardless at whatever age you are. But 16-year-olds, there's just way too much pressure on them, and the last thing we need to do is add more by making them vote.
Okay, the issue that you brought up just now is not to change the voting system. I think the voting system indeed is not perfect, and it won't be perfect with 16-year-olds. That is not the proposal. The proposal is that 16-year-olds should have a voice to be heard, because there are issues decided without them that affect their life and sometimes lead to their death. Very much like adults. When you bring up pressure and psychological problems, we have high suicide rates with especially white middle-aged men, very much like teenagers. They face the same pressures, and they can't always handle it either. We all know about the opioid crisis, which is struggling with what's going on. Yes, so 16-year-olds would have to face the same thing. Yes, elections are not perfect because human beings are not perfect. Let's face it, I talked last week, Star Trek, irrational human behavior is all around us. That applies to everyone. So I'm not saying lowering the age makes a perfect solution, but it includes a group that is right now excluded from decision-makings of decisions that affect their life. The other issue I want to bring up, since we're talking education, and Karen brought that up, there are studies out there to test the knowledge of students and 18 and older. From 2009, the We the People study, and questions were asked about the knowledge. For instance, who is the vice president? The students got it right 96% of the time. The 18 to 80-year-old group, 74% of the time. Understanding the meaning of judicial review. The students got it right 96% of the time, the adults 66% of the time. Name the representative, House of Representatives, 68% of the students, 68% of the adults. The same, not better. Could explain the political party ideology. Students 87%, adults 57%. So the question of maturity, or that the school is not working, I think is disproved when you have actual studies and ask questions. School's doing a good job. Later on in life, it seems to be that we lose the knowledge because we are not engaged. So I think the argument is, if we bring them into the frame, maybe it sticks with them longer, and those numbers later on will go up as well. The main point here is it disproves the fact that they are not mature enough, because adults are not mature either.
I'm not sure how that disproves, because they have this particular study, although I read a different study that had different numbers. You can find any study out there that says whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's true. So I saw a different study that disproves what you have there. And it was more, fewer people could answer any of those questions, no matter what their age was. As a 16-year-old though, you're worried about you. Your world as a 16-year-old revolves around yourself and your family maybe, and your friends. The long-term consequences of a vote doesn't really matter to a 16-year-old or I would say, a large percentage of 16-year-olds.
And I would debate that that's very different from adult lives. We all vote with our pocketbooks and our own interest first. I do think that stays with us. There are adults that are different, but there are 16-year-olds that are different. And we want to bring them into the fray again because their lives is affected by our laws. We expect them to obey those laws, yet they have no say in it, and they should, just like you and me.
Awesome. That is a perfect time for us to transition.
15-year-olds could do that too, and 14-year-olds could do that too.
That is a different debate.
Awesome. All right, David, to ask questions. Again, I want to reiterate, now is not the time to make points, to attack any of the debaters. It is the time to ask clarifying questions. You can open it up to everyone, or you can ask a single debater your question. So simply raise your hand when you have a question, and we'll call on you. Richard, you're first.
I'd like to address this to Karen. Karen, you rightly say that 16-year-olds are easily manipulated and not mature enough. Of course, that was said about women. It's also said about toddlers. Toddlers are not mature enough and easily assembled. And if you're looking at that, we should advance the voting age to 30. Give me a number, a reason for your number. Is it over 3 years old? 18, 16, 25? What? Give me a reason for your number.
I don't know, a reason for.
So, if I could, to clarify for him, I think he's saying he's acknowledging the fact that there's a sense of arbitrariness to the voting age, and so he's saying, what is your reason for why it shouldn't be 16 and why it should be at 18? What is the justification for it not being 16 and it being 18?
Life experience, life responsibility. At 18, you're handed a whole nother set of responsibilities. You're considered an adult by the standard of law. You're right, that's an arbitrary number. But at 16, you're in your parents' household. I wish all of 16-year-olds were in their parents' household. I wish all of 16-year-olds were being cared for appropriately by responsible adults. We know that's not true. We know there's 16-year-olds there who have to become head of household and have to take on more responsibility than they need to. But 16-year-olds are still learning. They're still growing. They're still building responsibility.
Thank you.
Debbie, and then Bill.
This is for the moderator to determine who should answer it, I think. If we lower the voting age from 18 to 16, do we have any side-by-side information, maybe what happened in this other state, that tells us that our education system is going to add any classes or information to make our citizens, as they're growing up and getting educated by our system, smarter in how to approach
Yeah,
issues?
that's a really good question. I'll actually allow the team arguing for the motion to first address that if they want to, and if not, the team against, and then if not that, I can answer with a little bit of information. So open up first.
I do not have particular information. I agree that our education system could improve, and we should have more civics classes. I have spoken in Toastmasters in favor of history and not just reducing education to English and math. However, again, we have a situation right now, and I believe that the voting age should be lowered because we are dealing with issues right now that 16-year-olds should be participating in. I would love to see more being done on the educational level for civics classes.
I'd also like to say that if the voting age was lowered, I believe that there would be a strong pressure on schools from the communities to make sure that those classes are being taught, and they're being taught well, and they're being taught at appropriate ages. I mean, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Something's gotta come first, and I think we could just make it happen.
Team arguing against, anything you'd like to add to that?
Education is the key. Voters, when you look at the studies of who votes, it is college educated, 50-plus year olds. Those are two different studies, actually. There's the, what age starts voting, where you start voting. As 18-year-olds, 18 to 29, I believe, for the most part, 20% of that group votes. Presidential elections, it goes up to 30, maybe 35%. Every age band above that votes at a higher rate. Every education level, starting between with people who have not finished school to graduate level, increases with each piece of education that they've earned over their lifetime.
Just to add to that really quick, since Karen brought it up, in 2016 nationally, 61.4% voted in the general population, and she's talking about age groups, 65 plus, 70% voter turnout, citizens 45 to 64, 66% turnout, 30 to 44, 58% turnout, and 18 to 29, 46% turnout. So it does reduce by age number. So when you're starting off younger, it's typically lower voter turnout rate, is what Karen was saying. So really quick, and then we'll go to Bill's question.
Wouldn't that beg to differ that if we start them younger, that the trends will increase sooner?
Why?
Why?
Why would they increase sooner?
Because we would tell them that they are valued, that their voices matter, that they are heard.
So an 18 to 29-year-old doesn't hear their value? They haven't figured that out yet?
I think there's plenty going on in our society, that decisions are being made against their interest, and therefore they don't feel valued, yes. And it's even worse under 18.
With that, we're actually going to transition to Bill's question.
This is pointed, based on one of Holly's comments about 16, being grown up at 16. What percent of kids between 16 and 17, we'll say, do you believe have the ability to make the long-term thought process for voting on whether it be a person or an issue, an amendment, whatever it may be, at between 16 and 17, is there a percent that you deciphered that are capable of making a decision that's it's long-term, worthwhile?
Sure, that's a great point. I haven't made up any percentage in my mind. I haven't falsified or come up with any statistics. Personally, I know that parents die. I know that parents get sick. I know that sometimes kids have to go to work 40 hours a week when they're 16 like I did. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the majority here. I'm just saying that sometimes things happen and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to deal with it. And that can force somebody to grow up. And that process doesn't make anyone like me know about the judiciary system or politics or even local matters, but it does engage you. And, you are paying taxes, and where is this money going? And no, I don't have a statistic for your question, but I believe it's enough out there that we're all here today, that they've moved in such a way that we're all talking about it. So I think that there's definitely power behind it.
Would you like to add to that, Rudy?
Nope.
Next question.
I have a question. So, as a parent, for example, you have a chance to teach your kids good habits as they're growing up, and once they hit the age 18, they move out of your household, and now you don't have that chance. So it's easy to say, in theory, you should vote as they're younger, but you never install that habit of starting to participate, to actually be becoming active. Once they hit the age 18, now they have all this other responsibility they have to deal with, and this new habit that they have to install in themselves. And it's kind of already late to install that habit because they're already too busy with everything else a lot of time. What do you guys think of that?
When I was growing up, my mom worked at the voting polls in Oregon, Portland. So at a very young age, she would bring me with her. And I got to go into the booth with her when she voted. It was really cool. I felt really important. As a parent, I sat down with my child when I voted, because we now get to vote by mail, which I think is fabulous. Other people disagree with that. They like to go to the polls. And so he was influenced in terms of, you need to have a voice, and you need to look, and you need to understand.
But that still doesn't answer my question. The habit is not really installed, because for it to become a habit, it has to be practiced. In theory, you just hear the theory of it, but then you never put it into practice. When you hit that age, and all the other responsibilities roll in of being 18, and you never practiced it, so you kind of get sideswiped and you move on. And then you remember it in 20 years.
When it's voting time, I ask my son, have you voted?
Me?
No. I mean, that's what I asked him. It's like, why am I getting an Oregon ballot for you? Aren't you registered in California now? And I hold him accountable to take care of his civic duty. So he couldn't vote when he was 16, but he votes now.
Good point. Would you like to add to that? Because I feel like what Dimitri is talking about here is this idea of a habit, and 16-year-olds will have a better opportunity of building that habit, because at 16 you're more likely to be living at home, and you can engage in that process where many 18-year-olds are transitioning to college, living on their own. Given all those responsibilities, are they really taking the time to also go out of the way to make sure that they're able to vote? And I think that's what he's, I believe, alluding to and talking about there, is that in fact 18 in some ways is a very bad time for 18-year-olds to suddenly have this responsibility to vote. And I know you also brought up the Tacoma Park incidents and the higher turnout rate there from 16, 17-year-olds to 18-year-olds. Do you want to add to that in any way?
No, I agree with his point of view that it's actually he's saying that influencing kids is a good thing, because we guide them to become more responsible. And Karen's answer said that it doesn't have to stop at 18-year-old. However, she would not say that she's influencing her son now in any way. So there's influencing, and I think it is a valid point that we need to teach our kids. And if we lower the voting age, that is driven home, I think, that points more and gives us a chance to bring a positive feedback, and that voting is positive, and that it makes a difference, and that you are valued, that you have something important to say. And I think that's a good thing.
Sally?
I have a question. I need clarification from both Karen and Rudy. Both of you talked about taxation in reference to voting rights. Karen, you mentioned that you felt your level of contribution as a teenager wasn't sufficient to warrant voting rights. And Rudy, you mentioned that children or young people pay taxes. I want to know how you connect that taxation to voting, and how does that square with citizens or with non-citizens who pay taxes? And do you feel, Karen, that contribution level is a criteria in terms of voting generally?
No. The point of, it's all about taxation without representation, right? As Mary and I were just talking, it's like, we still don't know where our tax dollars are being spent. We're voting at every election. And our Congress decides to piggyback on bills. So one thing is getting pushed through that's really important, and then they add a whole bunch of other spending things. We have no, unfortunately, control or understanding of that, except through our voting. But if we don't understand that, and we don't understand how the legislature works, then how do we we vote for the appropriate politicians? Are there any appropriate politicians? I don't know.
Taxation is not a reason for voting. The 24th Amendment states that the right of the citizens of the United States to vote in any election shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any other state by reason of failure to pay any poll or other tax. The reason for that is that after the Civil War in 1870, the 15th Amendment the Jim Crow laws were presented in the South and often entailed taxes to avoid black Americans to vote back then. So this is very clear, the law says that is under no circumstances allowed. You bring up a good point. Since I'm an immigrant, I know there is a 5-year period where you as an immigrant are not a full citizen and you're not allowed to vote. After the fact, however, you can become a citizen. So it's your choice if you stay a permanent resident. So that is your choice, so it's a little different. It's not put upon you, it's your choice. But 5 years would fall into your category that you're not allowed to vote while you pay taxes.
Thank you, really good questions. Get your question addressed and clarified. We are now going to transition to the closing statements from the debaters, and we're actually going to start with the team arguing against the motion. Would you all like the lectern for this part, or are you comfortable?
Yeah, we should.
Okay, I'm gonna bring the lectern back. Mary, you mentioned that you were going first. They have 2 minutes for closing arguments. Mary, please help me welcome Mary for a closing remarks.
Wow, that was a lot of information to take in, fellow Toastmasters and guests. I just want you to really think about it seriously. It is a serious vote that we're going to be voting on here shortly, if 16-year-olds should vote or not. I just want to remind you of the pressures that the 16-year-olds have currently. Not to say that 18 and 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s people don't have pressures as well. But 16-year-olds are still developing. It is true. And they need to be able to have that time to find themselves, identify themselves, and really become who they are. To even understand what it is they're voting for. Yes, Rudy made a point that they are more educated when they're in school, but they just finished studying all the courses in school, so it's fresh in their memories when they're answering these questionnaires. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Young people, they can still make their voices heard. They don't have to be voting. Many kids, like was brought up in the debate, they do volunteer services. They're involved in political clubs, and they're civically engaged in that whole volunteering process. And that is very important. Getting out, understanding your community, have that baseline when you're 16-year-old until you're 18, really understanding what it is you're voting for. Because those 16-year-olds, they're actually impacting the lives of all the citizens in the United States. And that is a huge responsibility and a lot of pressure that could be put on them that they really do not need. Fellow Toastmasters.
Well said, Mary. Next, arguing for the motion, Holly will be giving her closing remarks. Please help me welcome Holly.
First of all, thank you all for participating today and being with us for this riveting debate. I'd just like to close with something short and simple. Just the fact that there are no wrong votes. We don't deny people the right to vote because we think that they're going to vote badly. Sometimes our close friends, best friends, relatives shock us with how they vote. Many people believe that there are voters who are completely ignorant or misguided, and I don't believe that young people will always vote intelligently, especially since no one knows how to measure that. However, the same can be said for adults. So, why then are young people held to a higher standard? I'm willing to give them a chance to participate and get familiar with their civic duty of voting. Thank you.
Short and sweet, I love it. Next, arguing against the motion to give her closing remarks for the team, it will be Karen. Please help me welcome Karen.
Compelling arguments on both sides. I absolutely believe 20% of 16-year-olds should be able to vote. 80% of 16-year-olds affected by these shootings and this bullying that's going on and all of these cyber things that they have to now deal with, absolutely have an influence on our vote. They've set up rallies. They've brought them across the nation to let their voices be heard. And that's not just at a state level, that's at a federal level that they're influencing the rest of us. That group of 16-year-olds, I still don't believe the group as a whole is ready to vote. When you know more, you do better. You make better decisions. You make decisions that don't just affect your individual world. You understand how your decisions and your choice to go out and drink and drive affects somebody else's life if you hurt somebody. I certainly didn't understand that as a child, as a kid, and how my actions affected somebody else. 16-year-olds who are involved, my hand is up to you. Cheers. Thank you. Continue to influence our world. Continue to learn. And when you're 18, make it happen. Every single time you can vote. Fellow Toastmasters.
Thank you, Karen. Finally, last but not least, we will hear closing remarks from the team arguing for the motion. Please help me welcome Rudy.
So the big question for me still is, voting rights is a right for all citizens or not? If it is, then the burden of proof does not lie with 16-year-olds to prove in any way that they are capable of voting, but it lies with those who restrict or take away that right, like we have done in the past. It wasn't good enough to be non-white. It wasn't good enough to be a woman. It wasn't good enough unless you were in the military. I think that is the wrong approach, because no right is more precious in a free country than that of having a choice in the election of those who make the laws under which we must live. That applies to everyone, including 16 and 17-year-olds. Oregon is leading the way with that proposition. I think there is a large movement in the country. There are other states who are considering laws like that. Worldwide, there are many countries where 16 is allowed. Austria was mentioned, Brazil, Argentina as well. There's many, many others. The results we have from that say that the outcome of the election is not very different from what we have now. It is not the purpose to tilt the election in any way. It is simply to increase the number of people who can actually pursue the right that they should have. Because human dignity is inviolable, and the right to vote manifests it. Thank you.
Whew. Wow, that was awesome. To our reasoning, really using all senses of how we decide in our decision making. I really applaud them for that. It is not easy to share your beliefs and try to make a strong case and argue for that. I think it is a critical process. I am so glad that we did this debate. I think doing debates are really important. Fellow Toastmasters, what we just did today is democracy in action. It's a group of people gathering together, sharing ideas, and yes, it's arbitrary that we're even voting on this, but this is what democracy is all about, right? It takes a lot of maturity to share your opinions, to disagree with another person and still engage in civic conversation. I'm sure you've all experienced times with family members where you get into politics and it's just a mess, right? It's challenging to do that, but it's also a really important skill that I think we all need to develop to learn how to engage in these type of conversations and share our thoughts with someone that we disagree with and be okay with walking away and also respecting their opinion and understanding that they've gone through different experiences and respecting that and acknowledging that they've thought things out. It's just a little bit different than ours. So I really applaud you all. Please give another round of applause to all of you. I also also want to acknowledge all of you as the guests participating in this. I really appreciate the enthusiasm, the engagement of asking really good questions and showing up today even when you didn't really have a role or get to the table topics. I want to take a second to also acknowledge our guests. It was Dimitri.
Yeah.
Dimitri? Awesome. Dimitri, really quick, would you mind sharing a little bit about maybe what brought you here, what you think of the meeting, whatever you want to share?
I like the meeting. You guys are very nice people.
We try.
What brought me here, I want to improve my communication skills. So I think this is a perfect place to practice that.
Awesome. Awesome. And then we also have a returning guest. He came back. Any thoughts on the debate or anything?
It was there. I loved it. Yeah. It's good to see the other side of Toastmasters.
Yeah. It's definitely a little different. Jill, do we have the votes tallied? Okay.
30% of us started out undecided. 0% are undecided. So everybody had a firm decision after that.
That's cool.
90% of us, actually let's start up, sorry, I'll do the befores.
Yeah.
20% of us voted for the decision before. 50% of us voted against. It changed fairly dramatically because after the great presentation, 90% of us voted yes.
So 90% for the motion.
For the motion.
10% against the motion after.
Yeah.
All right. Team marketing for the motion won the debate. My apologies. I also forgot to acknowledge another guest. We have Rudy's daughter, Isabella, is here. Anything that you would like to share on the meeting today?
I mean, since I'm 18 and have been 16 recently and I'm still in school, this debate was interesting. And I liked that it's also represented by someone who's younger, because I think that's important too.
Are you talking about
It was fun to listen to.
Awesome. All right. That concludes our meeting. Again, you are all winners today, even though the team arguing for the motion technically won the debate. It is arbitrary. You are all winners in my estimation. Bill, would you like